The Appalachian foothills of western Pennsylvania exhaled a cold, gray breath on the edge of Sunday dawn. The streets of Havenwood were quiet, holding a peace that only exists before the world truly wakes. A thin mist clung to the air, softening the corners of the brick buildings and giving the streetlights a gentle halo. A dark green Ford F-150, meticulously clean but showing the honest wear of years, rumbled to a stop in a parking spot across from a small, unassuming diner. The sign above the door, painted in cheerful yellow and red, read the Keystone Diner. The engine cut, and for a long moment, the man inside didn't move. Jake sat with his hands on the wheel, his broad shoulders filling the cab. He was a man made of quiet angles and a solid presence, his face clean-shaven, his brown hair cut short and neat. Only his eyes, a deep and watchful gray, betrayed a restless energy. He closed them, taking a slow, measured breath, letting the morning stillness settle over him. A soft whine came from the passenger seat. Jake opened his eyes and glanced at his companion. Kaiser, a magnificent German shepherd with a thick, healthy coat of black and tan, was looking back at him. The dog's intelligent brown eyes were fixed on the diner, and a small puff of condensation escaped his muzzle, fogging the window. "I know, buddy," Jake said, his voice a low rumble. "Breakfast time." Jake moved with an economy of motion that had become second nature. He slid out of the truck, the cool air a welcome sensation on his face. Kaiser hopped down from the passenger side, his claws clicking softly on the pavement. The dog moved with a slight, almost imperceptible hitch in his left rear leg, the only physical remnant of a career that had ended a year ago. He stood at Jake's side, head up, scanning the empty street with a practiced gaze that mirrored his owner's. Together, they crossed the road. The moment they pushed through the glass door of the diner, a small bell jingled and the world changed. The gray mist was replaced by a warm, golden light. The air was thick with the holy trinity of diner smells, fresh coffee, sizzling bacon, and the sweet tang of pancake batter on a hot griddle. A classic rock song played softly from a vintage jukebox in the corner. For Jake, this wasn't just a diner. It was a decompression chamber. It was the one place where the sharp, sudden noises of the outside world were muted to a comforting hum. "Well, look what the cat dragged in. My two favorite fellas." A woman's voice, as warm as the coffee she was pouring, cut through the quiet. Peggy, the diner's owner, emerged from behind the counter. She was a woman in her 60s, with her silver hair pulled into a neat bun, her face a kind road map of friendly wrinkles. She wore a floral apron over her pink uniform and was wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Jake, honey, it's good to see you. And you too, handsome," she cooed, bending down to give Kaiser a vigorous scratch behind the ears. Kaiser leaned into her touch, his tail giving a few appreciative thumps against the linoleum floor. "Your table's waiting for you. Coffee's fresh." Jake offered a small, genuine smile. "Morning, Peggy. Smells good." "Always does, sweetie." She chuckled, leading them to a booth in the back corner. It was their booth. Tucked away, it gave Jake a clear view of the entire room and the front door, a tactical habit he couldn't shake. But here, it felt less like a necessity and more like a preference. He slid into the vinyl-upholstered bench and Kaiser immediately settled at his feet, disappearing under the table with a contented sigh. Jake let the atmosphere of the place wash over him. This was his therapy. Out there, a car backfiring sounded like gunfire. A shouted voice was a threat. In here, the clatter of ceramic mugs, the sizzle of the grill, and Peggy's easy conversation with the few other early rising regulars was a balm. After his last tour, the world had seemed too loud, too fast, too bright. He'd come home with Kaiser. Both of them honorably discharged from the Navy. Both of them carrying wounds you couldn't see. This diner, this weekly ritual, was the anchor that kept him tethered to the normal world. Kaiser was more than his old teammate. He was the living proof that he'd made it back. A moment later, another figure approached their table. "Morning, Jake. The usual? Black coffee, steak and eggs, medium rare." Chloe was a young woman in her early 20s, wearing the same pink uniform as Peggy, but hers was accented by a pair of bright, intelligent green eyes and a quick smile that seemed genuine, even at this early hour. She looked a little tired, with faint shadows under her eyes, but her energy was light. She held a coffee pot in one hand and a notepad in the other. "Chloe, that sounds about right," Jake confirmed. She filled his mug, then her gaze immediately dropped to the floor. "And how's the best boy in town this morning?" she asked softly. She crouched down, unconcerned with the diner floor, and snapped her fingers gently. Kaiser's head emerged from under the table, his tail beginning a rhythmic thump-thump-thump against the floor. He licked her hand and she giggled, scratching his favorite spot just under his chin. "You have a good week? Keep this guy out of trouble?" she whispered to the dog. Jake watched them. Chloe was one of the few people who treated Kaiser not as a weapon or a symbol, but simply as a very good dog. And she was one of the few people who didn't try to fill his silence with nervous chatter. She understood he was here for the quiet. "I'll get that right out," she said, standing up and flashing another quick smile at Jake before turning back toward the kitchen pass-through. As he sipped the coffee, hot and black and perfect, he could overhear her quiet conversation with Peggy at the register. "I was up all night studying for my A&P final," Chloe murmured, rubbing her eyes. "I swear I'm going to be dreaming about the brachial plexus." Peggy patted her hand. "You'll do great, kid. You've got a good head on your shoulders and, more importantly, a good heart. That's what makes a great nurse. Now, take that steak out to table 4. Jake listened to the exchange. It was part of the sanctuary. Good people working hard, being kind to each other. It was a simple, uncomplicated decency he had missed profoundly when he was away. Chloe returned a few minutes later, balancing a heavy plate. "Here you are. Steak and eggs for you," she said, setting it in front of him. Then, she placed a small side plate with 2 extra strips of bacon down, ostensibly for Jake. As she did, one of the strips accidentally slid off the plate, landing perfectly on a clean napkin she had also accidentally placed on the floor near her foot, well within Kaiser's reach. "Oops, clumsy me," she whispered, her eyes twinkling as she looked at Kaiser. "Fallen bacon. Guess it's no good now." Kaiser, who had watched this performance with the focus of a trained operative, waited until she stood straight. He looked at Jake. Jake gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The dog leaned forward and delicately, almost reverently, lifted the bacon from the napkin. The snap of it between his teeth was a deeply satisfying sound. Chloe turned back to Jake, her face neutral, but the smile was in her eyes. "Can I get you anything else, Jake?" "This is perfect, Chloe. Thanks," he said. She nodded and moved on to the next table. Jake cut into his steak, the tension he carried in his shoulders all week, the hypervigilance that always hummed just under his skin like a live wire, finally beginning to recede. He was in his booth. His dog was at his feet. The coffee was hot and the food was real. He was safe. They were safe. It was one morning, a perfect and fragile piece of it. Jake was halfway through his steak. Everything was perfect. The familiar hum of the diner was a warm, comfortable blanket. Mr. Miller, an elderly regular in booth 2, was quietly reading his newspaper. Peggy was humming along to the classic rock on the jukebox, polishing the gleaming chrome coffee urns. It was the very picture of a peaceful Sunday morning. And then the bell rang. It wasn't the cheerful jingle of a customer. It was a harsh, violent slam as the glass door was thrown open so hard it crashed against the interior wall. The sound sliced through the diner like a gunshot. Jake's head snapped up. His fork was halfway to his mouth. In the microsecond the fork froze, the world changed. The warm, soft focus feel of the diner sharpened to high definition. The comforting hum was gone, replaced by a sudden, dead silence. 3 men stumbled in, their movements jerky and wrong. They wore dark hoodies pulled up and cheap nylon masks over their faces. The first, clearly the leader, was wiry and vibrating with a tense energy. His eyes, visible through the holes in his mask, were wide and darting. He held a small, silver-plated pistol, and he held it badly, a sloppy grip with his finger already on the trigger. This was Twitch. The second was younger, skinnier, and held an aluminum baseball bat. He kept shifting his weight from foot to foot, unable to be still. He was a follower, terrified and high on adrenaline. This was Skinner. The third was a large, slow-moving bulk of a man, fumbling with an empty black duffel bag. He seemed surprised to be there, moving awkwardly as he tried to block the door. This was Bull. In that single second, Jake processed it all. The diner patron enjoying his steak was gone. The Navy SEAL had taken his place. He felt no fear. He felt a cold surge of analysis. His breathing didn't stop. It deepened, slowing his heart rate. His eyes, relaxed moments before, were now sweeping the room in a precise, drilled pattern. Threat 1, Twitch at the counter. Weapon, pistol. Small caliber. Bad grip. He's an amateur. Amateurs are unpredictable. Primary threat. Threat 2, Skinner by the jukebox. Weapon, bat. Secondary threat, watching the leader. Threat 3, Bull at the door. Unarmed, holding bag, blocking exit. Weak link. His gaze flickered over the civilians. Peggy behind the counter, frozen, hand to her mouth. The Millers in booth 2, their faces pale. A young family with a toddler in a high chair near the front window, deeply vulnerable. And Chloe. Chloe had been refilling Mr. Miller's coffee. She was caught in the open, halfway between the booths and the counter. Twitch, the leader, saw her move and swung the gun toward her. Nobody move. Twitch's voice was high and reedy. Don't nobody be a hero. On the floor. Everybody on the damn floor. Phones, drop the phones. For Chloe, the world didn't just sharpen. It shrank. It collapsed to a single, terrifying point of focus, the round, dark hole at the end of the silver pistol pointing directly at her chest. The coffee pot in her hand suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. She couldn't breathe. She heard the man yelling, but the words were a distorted buzz. Her knowledge, her nursing procedures, her anatomical charts, it all vanished. She was just a 22-year-old girl, and she was about to die in a diner. A small, strangled sound, a sob, escaped her throat. "I said down," screamed Skinner, punctuating the command by swinging the bat. He smashed the curved glass of the pie display on the counter. The sound of shattering glass was a second violation, ripping through the warm, safe cocoon of the diner. The family with the child screamed. The baby started crying, a high, terrified wail. Under the table, Jake felt a slight vibration against his leg. It wasn't a sound yet, but a deep rumble in Kaiser's chest. The dog's body had gone rigid. He had shifted modes, too. The friendly, bacon-loving pet was gone. The military working dog was present. Jake didn't look down. His eyes were locked on Twitch. He slowly, deliberately, moved his right hand from the table and placed it on top of Kaiser's head. He applied a firm, steady pressure. It was a tactile command, more certain than any word: stand. The rumble subsided, but the tension in the dog's muscles remained. Kaiser was a compressed spring, waiting for a single word. "You!" Twitch screamed, gesturing with the gun at Chloe. "Get behind the counter. The register. Open it, now." Chloe tried to move, but her legs felt like they were filled with lead. The coffee pot slipped from her nerveless fingers and shattered on the floor, sending hot coffee and ceramic shards skittering across the linoleum. The sudden noise made Skinner jump. "Move it! Move it!" Twitch shrieked, taking a step toward her. Jake watched. His mind was a cold, clear computer. Too many civilians. No clean line of attack. The family by the window was in the line of fire. If I move, Twitch shoots. He misses Chloe, but he hits the Millers. Have to wait. Let them get focused. Create an opening. He hated this. He hated this senseless, stupid violence. He'd spent his life alongside professionals, men who fought with purpose and precision. This was chaos. This was base, greedy fear. And they had brought it here. They had brought their dirt and their noise and their brokenness into his sanctuary. They had pointed a gun at Chloe. They had made a baby cry, and they had smashed Peggy's pie case. A cold, quiet rage settled over him, sharpening his focus even further. He was no longer just analyzing. He was waiting. The men in his diner had no idea who was sitting in the back booth. They saw a quiet man eating breakfast. They didn't see the ghost. They didn't see the weapon. "I'm going. I'm going." Chloe finally cried out, her voice thin and trembling. She stumbled, hands raised, slipping on the slick coffee as she scrambled behind the counter. Peggy, pale but resolved, was already there. "It's okay, honey," she whispered, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the keys to the register. Twitch followed Chloe, pressing the gun to her temple. "Open it, old lady. Open it now, or the girl gets it." The diner was silent, save for the desperate crying of the baby and Chloe's ragged, terrified breaths. Jake remained perfectly still. He waited. The predator is patient. The moment would come. The barrel of the silver pistol was cold. Chloe could feel the small, round pressure of it against her temple, a single point of metallic ice in the blazing heat of her fear. Her entire world had compressed to that one terrifying point of contact. "I said, open it." Twitch screamed, his voice high, reedy, and cracking with adrenaline. He was practically vibrating beside her. She could smell the sour tang of his fear sweat. Peggy was at the other side of the register, her hands hovering over the keys, but they were trembling so badly she couldn't seem to make them connect. The register was an old model, a heavy chrome and steel machine from another era, and it required a specific sequence of key turns and button presses. It wasn't built for speed. It was built to last a lifetime. "Please," Peggy whispered, her voice a thread. "Please, son, just calm down. I'll get it for you. My hands, they just won't listen." "Don't call me son." Twitch shrieked, and he jammed the gun harder against Chloe's temple, making her cry out. From the back booth, Jake watched. He didn't move a muscle. He was a statue, a part of the diner's furniture. His breakfast sat before him. The steak and eggs were getting cold, a forgotten relic from a world that had ceased to exist 60 seconds ago. He was in the tunnel, a state of absolute, cold focus. His mind was a battlefield computer running countless calculations. Problem: Twitch's proximity to Chloe. He's using her as a shield. His trigger discipline is non-existent. A sudden noise, a wrong move, and he'll fire on reflex. His eyes flicked to Skinner, who was pacing near the jukebox, slapping the bat into his palm. Thwack! 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 The sound was a jittery, unnerving rhythm in the small room. Face the wall. Skinner suddenly yelled at the Millers. The elderly couple flinched, and Mr. Miller slowly, painfully helped his wife turn in the booth. Twitch! It's taking too long. The big man at the door grumbled. His voice was low and nervous. Just grab what we can and go. This was a bad idea. I told you this was a bad idea. Shut up, bull. Twitch snapped, his head whipping around. You want your cut? You'll shut up and you'll watch the door. I'm in charge here. This bickering, this fracturing of their already weak alliance was exactly what Jake would have exploited in another context. Here, it just made everything worse. Twitch was volatile. His authority was being challenged and he was taking his frustration out on the hostages. He turned back to the counter. New calculation, Jake thought, his gaze unwavering. Unstable alliance. Twitch is losing control. He's going to do something stupid to reassert dominance. He's going to hurt someone. He rechecked his angles. Distance to Twitch, 25 feet. Target, cranium. Path obstructed. Peggy is directly behind him in the line of fire. If I miss or if the round fragments, she gets hit. Unacceptable. He shifted his mental target. Skinner, distance 15 feet. Clear path. I can cover that distance in 1.8 seconds. Disarm. Neutralize. But what does Twitch do in that 1.8 seconds? He hears the commotion. He turns. He sees his buddy go down. He panics. He fires. He kills Chloe. Unacceptable. He was pinned. The botched, amateur nature of the robbery had created a perfect tactical stalemate. He was a scalpel in a room that demanded a hammer, but using the hammer would destroy everything. He had to wait. He had to be patient. His entire being sank into a state of deep, observational stillness. The patience of a sniper. The patience of a predator. I'm trying. Peggy sobbed, her fingers finally hitting a key. The register drawer made a ka-chunk sound, but only opened an inch. It was jammed. Useless. Twitch roared in frustration. With his free hand, he shoved Chloe hard. It wasn't a tactical move. It was a pure, frustrated lash out. Chloe, already off balance, slammed into the stainless steel counter, the air driven from her lungs in a painful gasp. That sound, small as it was a searing violation. Under Jake's table, it was the final straw. Kaiser, who had been holding his position under extreme duress, trembled, unable to contain his protective anguish any longer. A low, desperate whine escaped his throat, a sound of supreme distress. It was the sound of a guardian forced to witness his charge being harmed. Jake's hand tightened on the dog's head, the pressure increasing. Easy, buddy. Easy. Not yet. Not yet. But in the tense silence of the diner, the small sound carried. Chloe heard it. In her terrified, winded state, clutching her side, her head snapped up. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted wildly. They found the back booth. They found Jake, who was watching her, his gaze as steady and unmoving as a mountain. She saw the absolute stillness in him. She knew his dog was under that table, a dog who adored her, a dog who was now whining for her. It wasn't a look of demand. It was a look of frantic, desperate appeal, a silent, desperate scream to the only other source of power in the room. And in that moment of eye contact, Jake gave her the smallest, yet most infinite, of nods. I am here. Twitch. I'm not kidding, man. I think I hear sirens. Bull yelled from the door, his voice an octave higher now. There ain't no sirens, you, Twitch screamed back, turning his head fully to shout at his clumsy accomplice. For one fatal second, his attention was divided. The gun was still at Chloe's head, but his eyes were on Bull. Jake saw it, the opening. His weight shifted, his muscles tensed, coiling for the explosive movement he had been suppressing. But before his feet could even leave the floor, Twitch had turned back, his face a mask of rage. He was done waiting. He was done being challenged. "I'm not leaving empty-handed," he snarled, not at Chloe, but at Peggy. He raised his free hand, the one he'd used to shove Chloe, and swung it backhand, aiming for the elderly woman's face. Time stopped. The hand moved. Chloe screamed, and a line was crossed. The world held its breath. Twitch's hand, open and ugly, arced through the air, aimed squarely at Peggy's face. The elderly woman flinched, her eyes squeezed shut, a small, terrified sound escaping her. Chloe, frozen against the counter, screamed, "No." In the back booth, Jake moved. The decision was no longer tactical. It was moral. The threat was active, immediate, and directed at the helpless. The calculations were over. The waiting was done. He was a compressed spring, and the trigger had just been pulled. His muscles coiled, his weight shifted, and he began to explode from the booth. But he was too far, and he was only human. Under the table, Kaiser was a statue of pure, vibrating tension. His entire life was a master class in control. From his first day of training, he had been conditioned, rewarded, and corrected on one single, unbreakable principle: the handler is the beginning and the end of all things. Do not bite. Do not engage. Do not act without the command. Jake's hand on his head was a physical shackle, a reminder of that sacred rule. He had held when the men burst in. He had held when they screamed. He had held when they broke the glass. He had whined. But he had held when they shoved Chloe, the giver of bacon, the source of kind whispers. But this was different. This was not a shove. This was a strike. This was not against a young woman, but against the matriarch, against Peggy, the alpha of this warm, safe den, the woman who smelled of cinnamon and kindness, who scratched his ears and called him handsome. In the microsecond that Twitch's hand began its swing, thousands of hours of training warred with 50,000 years of instinct, and instinct won. The hand on his head was no longer a command. It was an anchor he had to break. Before Jake's foot had even cleared the booth, Kaiser acted. He didn't just move, he detonated. He launched himself from under the table, a 75-pound projectile of focused, loyal fury. He was a black and tan blur, a streak of righteous instinct. There was no bark, no warning growl. The time for warnings was over. There was only action. His claws scrabbled for purchase on the linoleum made slick with coffee, his powerful hind legs driving. He covered the 25 feet of diner floor in a single, fluid motion so fast it seemed to bend the air. Skinner, still idly slapping his bat, saw the movement first. His mouth fell open, but no sound came out. Twitch never saw it coming. His focus was on Peggy, his arm raised to strike. The last thing he heard was a sound like a freight train tearing through the air. Kaiser's target was precise. He was not a wild animal. He was a trained weapon, and his training now served his instinct. He didn't go for the throat. He went for the threat. He went for the arm that was raised to strike. He impacted Twitch's forearm with the full, driving weight of his body. His jaws, evolved for this exact purpose, clamped down. The impact was hideous, a thick, wet sound followed by the sharp, brittle crack of bone. Twitch's scream was something inhuman. It was a primal shriek of agony and pure, unadulterated disbelief. He'd forgotten about the dog. He hadn't even known about the dog. The pain was immediate, white-hot, and absolute. He looked down at his arm and at the snarling, furred face attached to it, and his brain simply shut down. The silver pistol held loosely in his other hand was irrelevant. The shock, the impact, and the sheer violence of the attack blew all thought from his mind. His fingers went numb. The gun dropped from his grasp, clattering on the tile floor before spinning away under the next booth, coming to rest against a chrome pedestal. The primary threat was gone. For a long, terrible second, the diner was frozen. The only sounds were the hysterical shrieking of Twitch and the low, terrifying, jaw-locked growl of Kaiser. He didn't let go. He held, his entire body rigid, his eyes locked on the man he had neutralized. Chloe was pressed against the back counter, hand over her mouth, eyes wide with a mixture of horror and awe. Peggy was staring, her own hand still raised to ward off a blow that never came. The Millers were peering over their booth, pale as ghosts. Bull, at the door, looked at his screaming leader, at the dog, then at the door, his mind already calculating his escape. Skinner was frozen by the jukebox, the bat held uselessly in his hands, staring at the sudden, impossible turn of events, and Jake was finally clear of the booth. He was on his feet, his cold gray eyes taking in the new tactical reality in a single glance. Twitch, neutralized, unarmed, in shock. Kaiser, engaged, holding. Gun secured under booth 3. Bull, panicked, flight risk. Skinner, frozen, armed with bat, target of opportunity. The stalemate was broken. The board had been violently, decisively reset. And it had been reset by the one member of the team who had acted not on orders, but on love. Jake didn't move toward his dog, he moved toward the next threat. The fight had just begun. The tableau held for one frozen moment, a snapshot of chaos. Twitch on the floor, cradling his arm, a high, choked screaming sound coming from his throat. Kaiser a locked statue of muscle, his bite on the robber's forearm unrelenting, his low growl a counterpoint to the man's cries. Chloe and Peggy were pressed against the back wall, hands over their mouths. The Millers were halfway out of their booth, and Jake was a coiled predator, his path to the next threat finally clear. Then the eternal moment shattered. It was Skinner, the skinny one with the baseball bat, who unfroze first. His wide, shocked eyes darted from his screaming leader on the floor to the massive dog latched onto him. The horror that had paralyzed him turned into a vicious, panicked rage. He didn't see the operator moving toward him like a phantom. He didn't see Bull at the door, his hand already fumbling for the handle. He saw only the animal that had taken down his partner. "Get off him," Skinner shrieked, his voice cracking. He lunged forward, not at Jake, but at Kaiser. He raised the aluminum bat high over his shoulder. Jake saw the movement. "Kaiser! Out!" he commanded, his voice a sharp bark that cut across the room. He was closing the distance, but he was still 5 feet away. Kaiser, the loyal soldier, obeyed the command instantly. His jaws opened, releasing Twitch's ruined forearm. He turned, head coming up to face the new, incoming threat. He was trained to engage, to meet the attack. He never had a chance. Skinner swung the bat with all the force of his skinny, desperate body. It wasn't a practice swing. It was a wild, hateful arc aimed at the center mass of the animal before him. The bat connected with Kaiser's side, just behind his shoulder. It didn't make a crack. It made a sickening, hollow thud, a sound that seemed to suck the air out of the diner. Kaiser's response wasn't a growl. It was a sound Jake had never heard before. Not in training, not on the battlefield. It was a high, thin, piercing cry of pure, unadulterated pain. The sound was a physical blow, striking everyone in the room. The force of the swing lifted the 75-pound dog off the floor, sending him crashing into the base of a booth. He crumpled to the ground, his legs scrambling, trying to get up, but he only managed a pained whimper, his body trembling. Chloe screamed, a real scream this time, her hand flying to her mouth. No. That single cry of pain changed the temperature in the room. It cut through Twitch's hysterics. It made Bull, who was halfway out the door for a final look back, freeze. And for Jake, it was a fundamental, seismic shift. The cold, detached strategist who had been managing a hostage crisis was gone. The man who had waited patiently, calculated, and observed was replaced by something else entirely. A cold, precise, and terrible rage rose in him. It was a fury so pure and focused it was almost silent. These men hadn't just threatened his sanctuary. They hadn't just terrorized his friends. They had hurt his family. They had hurt Kaiser. Skinner saw Kaiser go down and felt a surge of adrenaline-fueled victory. He raised the bat again, ready for a second swing at the whimpering dog on the floor. "That's what you get," he spat. He never saw Jake. Jake covered the last 5 feet in a blur of motion. He didn't yell. He didn't make a sound. He simply arrived. He intercepted the second bat swing. His left hand came up, not to block the bat, but to meet it, catching Skinner's wrist in a vise of steel. The momentum of the swing was stopped instantly, painfully. Skinner's eyes widened in surprise. With his other hand, Jake struck. It wasn't a punch. It was a palm heel strike delivered with the full leverage of his body, connecting with the side of Skinner's jaw. The sound of breaking bone this time was sharp and final. Skinner's head snapped to the side, his eyes rolling back. Before his body could even begin to fall, Jake disarmed him. He ripped the bat from Skinner's limp fingers, simultaneously twisting the wrist he held. A second crack echoed in the diner as the bone broke. Skinner collapsed to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut, unconscious before he hit the ground. The entire exchange took less than 2 seconds. Now the diner was truly silent. The baby in the high chair had stopped crying, stunned into silence. The Millers were staring, dumbfounded. Twitch had stopped screaming, his cries reduced to wet, gasping sobs as he looked at his mangled arm. And Bull, the big man at the door, had seen it all. He'd seen the dog go down. He'd seen Jake move with impossible speed. He'd seen Skinner drop like a stone. He looked from Twitch on the floor, to the terrifyingly calm man standing in the middle of the room. He made the only decision his terrified mind could. He shoved the door open and he ran, sprinting down the misty Havenwood street, leaving behind the empty bag, his partners, and the entire robbery. He was gone. Jake let him go, one threat at a time. The room was quiet. Twitch was down. Skinner was down. Bull was gone. The civilians were safe. He tossed the aluminum bat clattering onto an empty table. He stood for a moment, his chest rising and falling in one controlled breath. He was the only one left standing. Then from the corner of the room came the sound that broke his composure. A quiet, terrible, pained whimper. Jake's head snapped toward the sound. Kaiser was trying to push himself up with his front legs, but his back legs weren't cooperating. His tail gave one weak, desperate thump on the floor when he saw Jake looking at him. The cold rage vanished, replaced by a sharp, painful wave of fear. Kaiser. Jake breathed, and he finally moved, not toward the robbers, not toward the civilians, but to his partner, to his friend. The silence that fell over the diner was a heavy, suffocating blanket, deeper than the noise before it. It was broken by only three sounds: the wet, choked sobs of Twitch, who was rocking on the floor, cradling his ruined arm, the high-pitched wail of the child in the front booth, and a low, terribly pained whimper from the corner. It was this last sound that tore through Jake, cutting deeper than any bullet ever could. He stood in the middle of the diner, the aluminum bat held loosely in his hand. Skinner was an unmoving heap at his feet. Twitch was combat ineffective. Bull was gone. For a microsecond, everything in Jake wanted to run to Kaiser, to gather his friend in his arms. But the mission wasn't complete. The scene wasn't secure. He dropped the bat onto the vinyl seat of an empty booth. The clatter made Chloe flinch. Jake moved, his actions still dictated by the cold, clear logic of his training. He stepped over Skinner's unconscious body and went to Twitch. The man flinched, scrambling backward, his eyes wild with terror. No more. Please, I'm done. I'm done. Jake ignored his pleas. His eyes were cold. He quickly checked the man for other weapons and found none. He looked at the mangled forearm, a mess of blood and bone, and felt nothing. He then moved to Skinner, nudging the unconscious man with his boot. He was out cold. Jake knelt, his hands quickly and efficiently patting him down. He found a pocket knife, which he took and tossed onto the counter. The two remaining threats were neutralized. Now the civilians. He stood and turned, his gaze finding Peggy and Chloe, still huddled together by the coffee maker. His voice, when it came, wasn't a shout, but a clear, powerful command that cut through the horror. Peggy, call 911. Now. Peggy, pale and shaking, nodded, her fingers fumbling for the wall-mounted phone. Tell them, Jake continued, his voice precise. 3 robbery suspects. 1 has fled. 2 are injured and incapacitated. Request police and ambulance. He deliberately left out his own involvement. Tell them no shots were fired. This was critical. It would lower the alert level of the responding officers, protecting the civilians from a potentially chaotic entry. His eyes swept the room one last time. He saw the silver pistol, Twitch's weapon, gleaming under the booth where it had skidded. He walked over, knelt, and used 2 fingers to retrieve it. He checked the chamber. It was loaded. He cleared it and set it on the counter, away from the door. The scene was secure. The job was done. The seal vanished. In an instant, the hard lines of his face dissolved, the tactical coldness in his eyes replaced by a raw, naked fear. Kaiser. He breathed the name as he crossed the room in 2 long strides, kneeling beside his fallen partner. Kaiser was lying on his side, his breath shallow and fast. His dark eyes were locked on Jake, and as his handler knelt, his tail managed a single, weak, painful thump against the floor. A low, constant whimper vibrated in his chest. I'm here, buddy. I'm here, Jake whispered, his voice catching. His hands, so steady and sure in combat, were now trembling slightly as they hovered over the dog's side. It's okay. You're going to be okay. He gently ran his palm over Kaiser's ribcage. The dog flinched, letting out a sharper cry of pain. Jake froze. He could feel it, a terrible, unnatural shifting beneath the skin. The bat, swung with such desperate force, had done devastating damage. Broken ribs, punctured lung, internal bleeding. The possibilities flooded his mind, each worse than the last. Oh, dear Lord, Peggy's voice trembled from behind him. She was off the phone. That poor, brave boy. Chloe, who had been frozen, finally moved. The shock still made her knees tremble, but her mind, drilled in anatomy and emergency care, was beginning to cut through the fog. She saw Jake, the strong, silent man now hunched over his dog, his shoulders tight with a pain that was clearly more than just physical. She saw the dog gasping. She saw the blood on Twitch's arm. Her nurse's instincts took over. She grabbed a stack of clean white bar towels from under the counter. "Jake," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, if small. He looked up, his eyes haunted. She knelt beside him, careful not to crowd the dog. "We need to keep him warm. He's going into shock." She gently unfolded one towel and laid it over Kaiser's trembling body, avoiding the injured area. "Are his gums pale?" she asked, her training surfacing. Jake gently, tenderly lifted Kaiser's lip. "Pale," he confirmed, his voice tight. "Too pale." "Okay," Chloe took a deep breath. "We need to keep him still. The ambulance is coming for them, but we need to get him to a vet right now." "I know," Jake said. He looked toward the door. "I'll carry him." "Mr. Miller," Peggy said suddenly, her voice sharp. The older man, still standing by his booth, looked at her. "Go start that young man's truck for me. The green one. Keys must be in his pocket." "Right away," Mr. Miller said, spurred by a direct order. Jake looked at Peggy, a silent, profound gratitude in his eyes. He then looked at Chloe. She was using another towel to apply a bit of pressure, trying to find an external source of bleeding, but there was none. The damage was all inside. "You saved me," Chloe whispered, her eyes filling with tears as she looked at the dog. "You saved Peggy." "He's a good boy," Jake murmured, his hand stroking Kaiser's head, his thumb rubbing the soft fur behind his ears. "He's the best boy." The distant wail of sirens began to bleed in from the gray morning, a promise of order returning to their violated sanctuary. But for Jake, the only thing in the world that mattered was the weak, shallow breathing of the hero lying at his feet. The first siren crescendoed as it screamed onto their quiet street, followed quickly by a second. Red and blue lights, muted by the morning mist, painted the diner's windows in frantic, silent strokes. The sound, which only 10 minutes before would have been a violation, was now a relief. Jake didn't move from Kaiser's side. He just kept his hand on the dog's head, whispering, "Hang on, buddy. They're here. Just hang on." The diner door flew open, but this time it was kicked in by a heavy black boot. 2 police officers entered, hands on their holstered weapons, their eyes wide, sweeping the room. "Police, hands where I can see them. Everybody, hands up." "They're down," Jake said, his voice calm and clear. He didn't look up, but his voice carried. 2 hostiles, incapacitated, 1 fled. Civilians are secure. We have a K9 down. The lead officer, a tall, serious-looking man in his 50s with a nameplate that read Miller, took in the scene. The unconscious Skinner, the sobbing Twitch clutching his arm, and Jake, kneeling on the coffee-stained floor beside his dog. Miller's eyes narrowed. He recognized the man in the back, not personally, but by reputation. The quiet SEAL who lived out near the reservoir. "Officer Miller," Jake said, acknowledging him. Miller nodded, his professionalism taking over. "Jake. Looks like you've had a busy morning." He gestured to his partner. "Cuff those 2. Get EMS in here for the one with the arm. And you," he said to Skinner, "get him checked out." Then he saw Chloe and Peggy. "Ma'am, you 2 all right?" "We're fine," Peggy said, her voice shaky but firm. "Thanks to him and that brave dog." Miller's gaze softened as he looked at Kaiser. He was a cop. He understood what a K9 partner meant. "What's his status?" "It's bad," Jake said, his voice strained. "Took a baseball bat to the ribs. Breathing shallow. Gums are pale. I think he's bleeding internally." "EMS is on their way," Miller started. But Jake cut him off. "He doesn't need EMS. He needs a vet, now." "Jake, I have to get your statement. This is a crime scene." "You can get it later," Jake said. It wasn't a request. He was already sliding his arms gently under Kaiser's body. "He's not going to wait." "He's right," Chloe said suddenly, getting to her feet. Her fear was gone, replaced by a sharp, focused energy that reminded Jake of a combat medic. "I'm a nursing student. The dog is in shock and has signs of internal hemorrhaging. He needs an operating room, not a statement. I'm going with him." Miller looked at Chloe, then at Jake. He saw the steel in both their eyes. He also saw the other Mr. Miller jogging in, dangling Jake's truck keys. "All right," Miller sighed. "Get him out of here. But I need you at the station as soon as you can. We have to find the one that got away." "You'll have my full cooperation, officer," Jake said. Then he adjusted his hold. "Okay, Kaiser. Let's go. This is going to hurt, buddy. I'm sorry. He rose to his feet, lifting the 75-pound dog as if he were a child. The movement was agony for Kaiser. He let out a pained cry, his head lolling once before resting against Jake's chest. Jake's face was a mask of pained concentration. He moved toward the door, his step smooth, trying to absorb every shock. Chloe was right behind him, holding the clean towel to Kaiser's side. The other patrons, the Millers, the young family, parted for them, their faces etched with awe and concern. As Jake passed, Mrs. Miller reached out and touched his arm. "God bless that dog," she whispered. They burst out of the warm diner and into the cool, gray morning. The air was now alive with the flashing lights and radio chatter of the arrived police cruisers. Paramedics were rushing past them, heading inside to tend to Twitch and Skinner. Jake didn't look at them. His focus was on his truck, its engine already rumbling. A small island of hope in the chaos. Chloe pulled the passenger door open. "Set him on the seat," she instructed. "I'll get in the back, I can monitor him from there." Jake started to argue, to tell her she'd been through enough, but one look at her face stopped him. She wasn't the terrified girl from 10 minutes ago. She was a woman with a purpose. He needed her. He laid Kaiser gently on the bench seat, arranging the towel over him. Kaiser whimpered, his eyes half closed. "Easy, buddy. Almost there." Jake ran around to the driver's side, and Chloe climbed into the small back of the extended cab, leaning forward so she could keep a hand on Kaiser's body. The truck shot out of the diner's parking lot, its tires spitting gravel. The 10-minute drive to the 24-hour veterinary hospital was the longest of Jake's life. He drove fast, but with a fluid precision, his hands steady on the wheel. He'd driven through ambushes, through mortar fire, over terrain that would have terrified other men. But this was worse. This was a race against an enemy he couldn't see, a clock he couldn't stop. From the back, Chloe kept up a quiet, steady report. "His breathing's getting faster. That's the shock. Just drive, Jake. He's a fighter. He's still with us." They screeched to a halt at the vet hospital's emergency entrance. Before the truck had fully stopped, Jake was out, lifting Kaiser from the passenger seat. He ran through the automatic doors. "I need help," he yelled, his voice echoing in the clean, sterile lobby. K9 down, blunt force trauma to the chest. A team of techs in blue scrubs and a veterinarian, a young woman with tired but intelligent eyes, were on them instantly. They had a gurney. "What happened?" The vet, Dr. Sharma, asked, her hands already expertly moving over Kaiser's body as they wheeled him inside. "Hit with a baseball bat in the ribs. About 5 minutes ago," Jake reported, his voice clipped, professional. "Pale gums, shallow, rapid breathing. He's a retired MWD. His name is Kaiser." "We've got him, sir," Dr. Sharma said, meeting his eyes. "You did well getting him here this fast. We'll take it from here. You wait out here. A tech will be out to get your information." The gurney vanished through a pair of swinging doors. Jake was left standing in the empty lobby. His arms, which had just held his best friend, suddenly felt terribly empty. The adrenaline that had been coursing through him for the last 30 minutes drained away, leaving a bone-deep chill. He put a hand on the wall to steady himself. A moment later, Chloe was at his side, her hand gently on his elbow. "He's in the right place, Jake," she said softly. He nodded, but he couldn't speak. He turned and slid down the wall, collapsing into one of the hard plastic chairs in the waiting room. He buried his head in his hands. The lone hero, the unshakable seal, was gone. All that was left was a man covered in coffee and his friend's blood, terrified of the silence behind those swinging doors. The waiting room of the veterinary hospital was a quiet, sterile purgatory. The air smelled of antiseptic and the faint, animal scent of anxiety. The bright fluorescent lights overhead hummed, a sound that drilled into Jake's exhausted nerves. He sat slumped in the hard plastic chair, head in his hands, replaying the last 30 minutes. The thud of the bat, the hideous cry. Beside him, Chloe sat silently, her hands clasped in her lap. She was no longer the efficient nursing student or the terrified victim. She was just a young woman watching a strong man break. She had seen the way he carried the dog, the terror in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice soft. "When I was 12, she said, not looking at him, but at the wall. "My cat got hit by a car. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there. He died right in front of me." Jake slowly lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot. He said nothing, but he was listening. "I promised myself," she continued, her voice a little stronger, that I would never feel that helpless again. That's why I'm in nursing school. I wanted to fix things. I needed to be able to fix things. She finally turned to him, her green eyes clear and full of an understanding that belied their short acquaintance. They're fixing him, Jake. Dr. Sharma, she's the best. They're fixing him. Jake looked at this young woman, who had been through a terrifying ordeal, who had a gun held to her head, and who was now, impossibly, trying to comfort him. He saw the steel in her spine, the same steel that had allowed her to grab a first aid kit and get in the truck. He'd seen that strength before in the hardest operators. He'd just never seen it in a diner. You did good, Chloe, he said, his voice hoarse. In there. You were strong. So were you, she whispered. And so was he. They sat in shared silence again, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with a new, fragile respect. An hour, which felt like a lifetime, passed. Every time the double doors opened, Jake's head would snap up, his heart pounding, only to see a tech carrying a small cat or a clipboard. Finally, the doors opened and Dr. Sharma emerged. She had taken off her surgical mask and her face was etched with fatigue, but her eyes were clear. Jake was on his feet instantly, Chloe right beside him. He couldn't ask. He just waited, his hands clenched into fists. He is a very, very tough dog, Dr. Sharma began. Jake's heart hammered. That's what people always said before they gave you the bad news. It was bad, she said, not sugarcoating it. The bat broke 3 ribs. One of the fragments punctured his lung, causing a hemothorax. He was bleeding heavily into his chest cavity. A lot. You got him here just in time. Another 10 minutes. She let the sentence hang. Jake swayed and Chloe put a hand on his arm to steady him. But the doctor continued, and a small, tired smile touched her lips. The surgery was successful. We repaired the lung, drained his chest, and set the ribs. He's on fluids and heavy-duty painkillers. He's groggy. He's angry, and he's going to be very sore for a long time. She took a deep breath. But he's going to make it. He's stable. The words hit Jake like a physical force. The tension he'd been holding in his shoulders, his neck, his entire body since the moment the diner door burst open, released all at once. He staggered back a step and leaned against the wall, his head thrown back, a single, shuddering breath escaping him. It was a sound of grief and relief and exhaustion all rolled into one. Thank you, he breathed, his voice breaking. Thank you. Chloe was crying, silent tears of pure relief rolling down her cheeks. Can we see him? She asked. Just for a minute, Dr. Sharma said. He needs to rest. She led them through the doors into the quiet, warm ICU. There, in a large kennel on a bed of soft blankets, was Kaiser. He was shaved on one side, a network of tubes and bandages wrapped around his chest. He looked small, and fragile, but he was breathing, a slow, even, medicated rhythm. His eyes were closed, but as Jake approached, his tail gave a single, sleepy thump against the blankets. Jake knelt, pressing his forehead against the steel mesh of the kennel. Hey, buddy, he whispered. Hey, you did good. You did so good. I'm right here. Kaiser gave a small, sleepy sigh and drifted off again. They left him there in the care of the doctor. He'll need to stay for at least a few days so we can monitor him, Dr. Sharma said. But the danger is past. He's a hero. As they walked back into the lobby, the sun had finally broken through the morning mist. The gray dawn was turning into a bright, clear day. Jake's phone, which had been silent in his pocket, began to vibrate. He pulled it out. The caller ID read, Officer Miller. His duties weren't over yet. I have to take this, he told Chloe. He stepped outside into the crisp air. Jake here. Jake, Miller's voice was all business. Glad I reached you. How's your partner? He's stable, Jake said, the relief still new. He's going to make it. That's the best news I've heard all day, Miller said, and he sounded like he meant it. Now, I'm afraid I need you to come down to the station. We're processing the 2 we have in custody, and we're hunting for the 3rd. We need your official statement. I'll be there, Jake said. I have to take someone home first. He hung up and looked at Chloe, who was standing in the doorway, blinking in the new sunlight. She looked exhausted, her pink uniform stained with coffee and grime. Come on, he said gently. Let me take you home. The drive back through town was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the tense, tactical silence of the diner or the anxious, sterile silence of the hospital. It was a tired, shared peace. The town was awake now. People were jogging, walking their dogs, buying newspapers. The world had kept turning, oblivious to the small war that had been fought at the Keystone Diner. He pulled up in front of her apartment building. He put the truck in park. "Thank you, Jake," she said, turning to him. For everything, for saving us." "It wasn't me," he said, his gaze meeting hers. "It was him. Kaiser did that. And you? You saved him, Chloe. You kept my head on straight. You were a combat medic in there." She blushed at the compliment. "We make a good team, I guess." She paused, her hand on the door handle. Will you let me know how he is?" "I will," he promised. She got out, but before she closed the door, she leaned back in. "Thank you," she said again. "For both of you." He watched her go inside, and then he drove away. He drove to the police station and gave his statement, a cold, precise, and objective retelling of the facts. He left out the fear. He left out the rage. He just gave the facts. They'd found Bull hiding in a dumpster 3 blocks away. It was over. Hours later, he finally drove home. His truck felt terribly empty without Kaiser in the passenger seat. He walked into his silent house. It didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. It felt empty. He sat in his chair, the events of the day washing over him. The diner, he realized, wasn't a place. It was a collection of people. It was Peggy's kindness, and Chloe's quiet strength, and Kaiser's unwavering loyalty. His sanctuary had been violated, but it hadn't been broken. It had been defended, and it had been made stronger. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but just to rest. The storm was over, the sun was up, and his friend was alive.